You're listening to Speaking Of by WFSU Public Media. Snakes are an incredibly important part of the Floridian ecosystem. We borrowed an episode from our sister podcast, Coast to Canopy, where host Rob Diaz de Villegas sits down with Kim Sash and Pierson Hill, two local snake experts, to learn more about our state's native snake species.
Few animals elicit as emotional a response of fear and revulsion as snakes. But do they deserve our hate? Do they deserve our fear? Maybe if we learn a little bit about them, they'd seem less scary. That's our goal today. Today we're going to get to know the snakes of Florida, the garden snakes, the forest snakes, the water snakes, the common and the rare. I'm Rob Diaz de Villegas. Joining me in the studio today is Kim Sash. Kim is a biological monitoring coordinator at Tall Timbers Research Station and Land Conservancy. Thanks for being here, Kim.
Thanks for having me.
We also have Pierson Hill, a research associate with FWC's Fish and Wildlife Research Institute. And Pierson is Kim's husband.
Good morning, Rob. Happy to be here.
Morning, Pierson. And lastly, we have WFSU Public Media's own Regan McCarthy. Hi, Regan.
Hey, Rob. I'm excited to learn about these snakes.
Yeah, me too. We have, and that's the other thing too, we also have other guests. We have snake guests that are here with us. And so before we bring them out, I want to remind everybody, so if you want to see these snakes, you can find the video version of Coast to Canopy at wfsu.org/ecology blog or on the WFSU Ecology YouTube channel. So before we bring out our first snake guest, let's talk about what's your guys' jobs? You guys herpetologists, and what's a herpetologist? What's that job entail?
Well, I would consider myself a herpetologist, and all that means is that I study reptiles and amphibians in a professional capacity. And you can do that in any number of ways. You can study their genetics, you can study their conservation, you can study their ecology, you can study them in a zoo setting. What I do for my job is I generate research and science to provide information to conservation partners, both in private sector and the government sector, on how to conserve and regulate reptiles and amphibians.
Gotcha. And Kim, so you do herpetology, but that's not your whole job.
Yeah, and I got my master's studying snakes, so I love snakes. But I also work on, I do work on gopher tortoises and amphibians, but then I also have GPS collars on coyotes. I've worked on feral hogs, so I do kind of a whole range. So I'm kind of, more of a wildlife biologist than what I think of as a herpetologist. I mean, Pierson, you can ask Pierson, what is the scientific name of this species in Africa, and he can tell you for all the herps of the world. I am not that kind of herpetologist.
Gotcha.
Pierson, you were talking about where that name comes from, herpetologist, because I think when I think of snake, I don't think of a name that sounds like a herp to me. So where's that come from?
Right. Just traditionally, reptiles and amphibians have all just been lumped together in the same field of study because they tend to exist in the same place at the same time. They're kind of in this just general creepy crawly group, even though they're not taxonomically or evolutionarily related. So people who study snakes tend to also study salamanders and other creepy crawlies. So that's why they
ectotherms get kind of lumped.
Ectotherms.
Yes.
Ectotherms.
So yes. Does everybody know what an ectotherm is?
Cold-blooded animals.
Yes.
Cold-blooded animals.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So part of the job too is kind of handling the animals. I remember years ago, I shot a video with Tall Timbers did a bio blitz at the Clockney River. You guys were both there.
Yep.
And where Pierson got in the water with a snorkel and came back with Florida softshell turtle. I remember you said something like, what they lack in a hard shell, they make up for with claws and jaws. So talk about that. I mean, part of your job is to handle animals that can harm you. And talk about, to get you trained for that. Is that how do you get that experience?
Yeah, certainly as a herpetologist, we interact with big, scary turtles like you're talking about, softshell turtles, and I also trap alligator snapping turtles for my job, which get over 100 pounds and have a pretty impressive bite. And so there's a lot of on-the-job training and acquired experience that goes into that. When it comes to handling venomous snakes, since the consequences of an envenomation is medically serious, there's a much more formal training that goes with that and formal procedures. We use special equipment that keeps us, our body and our hands at a distance from the snake at all times. And so we take that a lot more seriously.
Gotcha. So one last question before we start bringing out our little friends. I want to talk about snakes in Florida. So every once in a while I see these kind of biodiversity maps of North America, trees, reptiles, and I see, a lot of times that concentrated spot of biodiversity tends to be not just Florida, but really like our area, like right around here. How diverse are snakes in Florida, and what are some of our different kind of overview of snakes in Florida?
Sure. We have 46 species of snakes in Florida. Only 6 of those are venomous species. And so the vast majority of species in Florida are non-venomous, but you can find them in almost every habitat Florida has to offer. We have snakes that live underground, we have snakes that live in the water, and we have snakes that live in the trees.
And I just want to add, because you're bringing up biodiversity and because I'm more of a wildlife biologist, I think it's really important that people do understand that we live in a biodiversity hotspot. This area is a biodiversity hotspot. Just like people always think the tropical rainforest is got all these species, but actually, the region of the Southeast is a biodiversity hotspot. And there's 2 ways that is designated. And one is that you have to have over 1,500 species of vascular plants. And so those are plants that they're endemic. They live here and they don't live anywhere else. And the other way, there's 2 criteria. The vascular plants, one of them, 1,500 species. And the other one is that you have to have over, I think it's 70% habitat loss. So you get designated as a biodiversity hotspot because you don't have very much habitat for all of these species that actually occur there. And, the Apalachicola National Forest is one of those areas that really pings that map because of all of the vascular plants and then a lot of amphibians and a lot of reptiles, including a lot of species of snake.
Do we have any endemic snakes in Florida?
We have several. We have something called the short-tailed king snake that only lives in the sand ridges of central Florida. They look like a living shoelace, only get about 2 feet long. And as far as we know, they only eat another little species of snake that lives in the sand and a few other skinks. And we have a few endemic forms of water snake as well. We have a South Florida mole king snake that only lives in the dry prairies, in the Kissimmee prairies. Florida has a high degree of endemism of snakes.
Gotcha.
And there's some Keys species, I think, right, that are kind of...
We don't have any endemic key species, but we have some races or subspecies of snakes that can also be found on the mainland, but when you get to the Florida Keys, they look a little bit different, so we give them a different taxonomic category.
Right.
Keys ringneck snake is one.
Yeah. They're genetically isolated on islands, of course. Yeah,
that's right.
They would start diversifying or changing. So, you mentioned the mole king snake.
Mm-hmm. We have 2 species of mole king snake in Florida. Extremely secretive. I've only caught 3 in my entire career as a herpetologist here in the Florida Panhandle, and they're a neat one. Always makes my month when I come across one.
So let's bring out our first snake guest. You have an eastern king snake, is that correct?
We do.
So we usually don't keep them in zippered bags, but he pooped in his other bag, so this is where we are now.
Look at that.
Oh my gosh, so beautiful.
So this is an eastern king snake, which is one of the more widespread and common races of the larger species called the common king snake. So depending on where you go in North America, you see various color forms of the common king snake. In the eastern U.S., we get the eastern king snake, which are typically black or kind of chocolate brown with yellow or white bands. So in Florida, you find snakes that look like this, basically in the Florida Panhandle and extreme northern Florida. And they change appearance as you go southward through the peninsula. You get something called the Florida king snake, which has a much busier yellow and black pattern. And by the time you get to the Everglades, you get something called the Brooks king snake, which is kind of a pale yellow tan with almost no pattern.
So those are subspecies of the eastern king snake?
Yep,
Gotcha.
correct.
So for folks who are listening here, I think to me this snake looks a little more chocolatey brown, I think, instead of the black king snake that I'm picturing from illustrations and books. This guy's like a nice chocolatey brown with some beautiful white stripes. And I really like looking at his underbelly area. His scales are so shiny and beautiful there. What a pretty snake.
King snakes have smooth scales, which give them that shiny appearance. as opposed to something with keeled scales, like a water snake or a rattlesnake. Each individual scale has a ridge that runs down the middle, and so it causes them not to be as shiny and reflective.
Yeah.
And
So how is this different from the king snake that you were just telling us about that's endemic to our area? The I forget
Mole
what
king snake.
Yeah, the mole king snake. What would I notice that would differentiate them?
Right. The eastern king snake is much bigger than the mole king snake as an adult. Mole king snakes max out about 2 feet. The mole king snakes in our area, kind of reddish with darker red or brown spots, very similar to a corn snake if you're familiar with those. They have different body proportions. So it's one of those things as a herpetologist, you look at enough of them over time and it's instantly apparent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And their habitat, I suppose, too, is a giveaway.
They do tend to segregate a little bit by habitat. Eastern king snakes are what we call a generalist, that you can kind of find them in most every habitat that we have. Since they eat such a wide variety of other animals, they also eat a lot of turtle eggs, and so you tend to find them around the edges of lakes where turtles spend a lot of time nesting. But of course, their claim to fame is their ability to be able to eat venomous snakes. They'll eat any snake that they can wolf down, but they have some immunity to the venom of our venomous snake species and can easily eat a cottonmouth or a rattlesnake.
I was wondering about that when you were talking about we were noticing the scales and how smooth and shiny they were. And I'm thinking like indigo snakes have a similar sort of,
Iridescence.
yeah, and they also eat venomous snakes. Is there any connection to that, or is that just like a wild coincidence? Or
I think in that case, it's probably a coincidence.
yeah. They eat other snakes. So talk about why you wanted to bring this one out first.
Yes. Well, this is one of my outreach snakes at Tall Timbers. And he's actually captive born. But his favorite thing to do is eat. So he's always hungry. We feed him mice. But if we were to, hold a few of our other snakes that we brought in today and then hold this guy, he would just probably try to eat my hand, just because of the smell, right? So you can see he's tongue flicking, and so he's smelling. He's always looking for a meal, and so it wouldn't be like, it wouldn't be like a strike, like a bite. It would be like open your mouth, kind of eat you, kind of thing.
In the tongue flicking, my understanding from a person who doesn't know a lot about snakes is that's smelling, right? He's trying to, so he's smelling you, smelling the area now to see if maybe there's some snacks there around.
I don't know if you have any mice in your studio, but he would find them if they existed.
So yes, snakes use their tongue to taste their environment, essentially. So what they're doing is picking up scent particles in the air, and they pull them back into their mouth, and they put that forked tongue up in the roof of their mouth into an organ called the Jacobson's organ. So it'd be basically like you licking the back of your nose in order to be able to smell.
Oh, wow.
Fascinating. Wow.
So where would we find an eastern king snake sort of in our area? What kind of habitats? You said around lake edges.
Yeah, since they eat a lot of the things that occur near wetlands, especially turtle eggs and other snakes, water snakes, they tend to be most abundant around lakes, riverways, and actually these days they're most abundant around the edges of salt marshes along the coast where they take advantage of abundant rodent populations. We're actually witnessing a disappearance in eastern king snakes throughout the southeast, especially in northern Florida. We are tracking citizen observations as part of my job, and so FWC maintains a rare snake reporting website that citizens, if they see an eastern king snake in their yard or while they're out in a park or national forest, they can upload the observation there, and it helps us kind of track their populations over time and know where they're doing well versus where they're disappearing. And we're not sure why they've disappeared. Like I said, they're a generalist snake. Generalist snakes tend to be able to tolerate human disturbances to the landscape. So something as robust as an eastern king snake disappearing from our landscape is alarming.
Right. Do you also look at like iNaturalist observations if people use that?
iNaturalist is a great way to report observations of these rare snakes as well.
And this is one of those species. So, like I said, I did my master's on snakes, and I did that at Tall Timbers. So I caught over 2,600 individual snakes. I put pit tags in them, like you microchip your dog, so I could recognize individuals. So if I recaptured them, I could keep a count. And king snakes, Bruce Means, who's I know you've talked to, he's
Right.
a famous herpetologist. And so Bruce was actually a research director at Tall Timbers in the 80s. And just opportunistically, Bruce out on the landscape of Tall Timbers caught about 28, I think it's 28 eastern king snakes. And so I did this intensive trapping study. And just on Tall Timbers alone, I caught over I think 1,800 snakes. I had several sites, but about 1,800 snakes on Tall Timbers, 19 different species. And never once did I catch an eastern king snake. And so Bruce and I actually wrote, you can look it up. We wrote a paper on this and just, very, very general, but definitely a decline of these species. And yeah, definitely don't know why. But some people think maybe fire ants are playing a role. They get in, if king snake lays its eggs, fire ants, as babies are hatching, will go into the eggs and kill them. They do that with snakes, turtles, ground nesting birds, all of those things. So maybe that plays a role. But yeah, it's really weird to not have eastern king snakes out in the landscape. And they were one of those species that, way back when there was tenant farmers living on Tall Timbers, everybody liked an eastern king snake because they do eat venomous snakes. So it was a snake that you did want around your house. This isn't a snake that people were just killing. So, we don't think it's a human caused, but it's really strange that they're not around as much anymore.
One question that I need to ask, because as a journalist, they always say, when you go out to do an interview, like if somebody has a dog, you got to ask the name of the dog. So I need to get the details here. The people want to know, does our king snake have a name?
Yes, he does. His name is Ray.
Ray.
Which is, I think somebody else named him, but I think that's how you say king in Spanish.
Rey?
Sure.
Yeah, that would be it.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
this is a very old snake, and the chocolate coloration that you mentioned earlier is one of the things you see in older king snakes. They tend to transition from a black and yellow more to a brown and cream as they get on in life.
see, his head is much darker, but he definitely gets browner.
Right, I do see that. He's got in the first few inches there a much darker color and then much lighter toward the tail. How long do you think that snake is? He looks pretty long to me.
He's 4.5 feet.
Yeah,
I love that you can just like untangle him.
Oh, yeah. Look at that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I would say longer than a yard, right? Does that beat a yardstick? For sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say so.
Very
Wow.
cool.
He looks deceptively small because my arms are so long.
You've got a great wingspan.
You can hold them out this way.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Hey, Ray.
This is average size for an adult eastern king snake.
And I think he's probably, I don't know, I think I've had him for at least 10 years now.
And you got him as an adult, and they only live 15 years in captivity. So he's an old man.
Yeah.
And,
But in good average.
But yeah, he's educated hundreds, if not thousands, of young people about our local snakes.
Gotcha. So do you when you interface with the public and you start bringing out snakes, do you get a lot of people who are just really revulsed and just like, and do you ever feel like you've changed any? Has anyone ever said like, oh, touching a snake today? And I know one story for sure because I got it on tape, but just where someone held a snake and they're like, I'm not as afraid as I used to be of snakes.
All the time, and that's one of the most rewarding parts of doing public outreach and manning an educational table is that you get to change hearts and minds surrounding snakes. And the most interesting part is that it's always the adults or the parents, of children that are the most afraid. So the adults are glued to the back wall, or the children are up front showing no fear. And but a lot of parents can't have their kids showing them up and being braver. So the adults will work their way forward and eventually get to hold one of these outreach snakes.
Yeah, no. It was the last time I went on River Trek, Apalachicola River Trek, 2021. There was one of the paddlers had a lifelong fear of snakes, and he held snakes that you brought to Stefanogo, and we had dinner on the second night. And that was a beautiful thing to catch on tape too. So speaking of snakes that we might encounter more regularly, let's meet a gray rat snake.
I love how snakes travel. They just
Pillowcases.
yeah,
A lot of pillowcases.
throw them in a sack and they're good to go.
It's really actually very easy. It's kind of nice.
And it's breathable, right? Because I know when we did when
Yeah.
I went to an indigo snake release, and they were in the pillowcases. You can see the scales from the outside, which is really cool. Oh wow.
It's a very good way to have them travel.
That's not as gray as I would have thought it would have been.
This is our favorite. This is Pierson, especially that favorite color phase. Those really, really light gray rat snakes. So you can see because they have blotches, right? So we just saw the king snake. He had rings, and this guy has blotches. So these are kind of like identifying characteristics of the snake. So you see the blotches going all down his back, and typically they are much darker. And this guy, do you call him like the white oak phase?
Yeah, people who keep gray rat snakes, will designate these pale ones as white oak phase gray rat snakes.
Gotcha.
But locally here in the Florida Panhandle, people call all gray rat snakes oak snakes, just as a colloquialism.
Do they tend to live in oak trees? Is there a connection there?
They do. They like live oak trees a lot. They are arboreal, which means they spend a lot of time up in tree limbs. It's because they eat a lot of bird eggs and hatchling birds. They raid nests. And so great climbers. They can climb straight up the side of a tree.
So when I did my master's, I put radio trackers in gray rat snakes and corn snakes. And it's amazing, these guys, their familiarity with their home range. So we would track them. And actually, that's how Pierson and I met. He was my intern. I don't recommend dating your employees, but we did date for we dated for 13 years. We dated for 13 years, so we made sure it was real. Yeah. But anyway. But they would go to the same oak tree again and again and again, and about a 7-acre home range. So, but they knew, crawling around their belly to get back to that same spot time after time. And a lot of times they'll climb up those oak trees, both to forage, eating a baby gray squirrel, or to go up there to shed, right? So they're so susceptible when they're shedding because their eyes, they kind of go blind almost, because their eyes turn. So they go back to those trees or whatever and shed and hang out there. And just the ability to go back to that's what we call site fidelity, is just they're going back to the same site again and again and again. And so when you cut down a tree or you remove that tree, especially there's a lot of development happening in tall timber or in Tallahassee right now, and you see like all these trees being cut down. And so that's probably really disrupting some of these snakes' home ranges. And then a lot of times that's when you see them, you make a change in your yard and all of a sudden things start popping up. And it's just because you've kind of disrupted where they're going to naturally go. And what's interesting is that my friend Jen House, who works at the Jones Center up at Itchaway, she also had radio telemetry in these, so little radios, that make a beep, so we follow them. And the Jones Center is much more of the pristine, like longleaf wiregrass ecosystem,
right,
whereas Tall Timbers is much more old field, so we have a lot more hardwoods. And what we saw was that her guys, because she had less oak trees, they have a much larger home range because they're traveling a lot further to get to some of those hardwood trees than they would be at Tall Timbers.
You can catch the rest of our snake conversation on the Coast to Canopy podcast. Find it wherever you listen to podcasts or at wfsu.org/ecologyblog. And if you want to see these snakes, well, of course you want to see these snakes, you can watch the video version on the blog or on the WFSU Ecology YouTube channel.